Folks, the war on farmers has not gone away. We have a little bit of reprieve in some areas thanks to policies being brought in by the current administration. But internationally, these things continue. And in democratic states and certain more liberal states, we're still seeing brazen, blatant attacks on farmers, ranchers, and agricultural communities. It's all very disturbing to me. I've been following this for years now. I saw it first in South Africa, then in Brazil, then in China, then in Canada, now the Netherlands, and of course the United States of America. Joining us today to discuss all this and more is Charles Rankin. He is the founder and host of Yanasa TV. It's an independent news and documentary platform that amplifies the voices of America's farmers, ranchers, and rural communities. He does investigative storytelling and tries to shed light on the challenges facing our ranchers, our farmers, our agricultural communities, everything from water rights and land use to food freedom and other issues. He's also the executive director of Meet My Neighbor Productions. It's a nonprofit. It's dedicated to agricultural education, rural youth development through documentary filmmaking and outreach programs. And he says his work bridges journalism and advocacy, giving viewers a firsthand look at the people and policies shaping our food systems. And, if there's one thing that unites all of us on this entire planet, doesn't matter your politics, your religion, your skin color, none of it, it is that we all not just like to eat, but need to eat. Charlie, welcome to the program. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming on.
No problem.
Before we get into the big global picture, I know you've been following a number of stories, but one in particular really jumped out at me, just an incredible attack on a farmer. Talk to us about it, Charlie.
Yeah, so there's an 85-year-old farmer in Washington, and something you have to realize about what's going on in the state of Washington is earlier this year they did an injunction against 30,000 farmers, pretty much telling them, you guys have to prove your water rights to the state. And a lot of these water rights are things that have been picked up over generations, so especially the older farmers who really don't understand the bureaucratic system, don't understand how to obtain attorneys. They're the ones who kind of fall through the cracks with these types of things. Now, this particular farmer's in a different county in Washington than Whatcom, and it's a similar story, though. He's had what he assumed were water rights since the 1950s when his dad bought the property. They've been farming that property ever since, watering it, irrigating it, same time every single year. The state of Washington came out, hit him with a $100,000 fine. And that was in the form of a lien against his property. He has until either today or the next couple days to pretty much try and appeal that. But this is an 85-year-old man, doesn't understand how all the system works. There's no way he could ever afford an attorney. And so that lien will eventually just turn into a land grab against him. And all he did was water his hay fields for 20 days during the summer for a $100,000 fine.
That's amazing. And totally outrageous and disproportional. So what's the status now? He is just waiting for the state to come and basically finish him off? I mean, is this just a waiting game? Is there any hope?
I think from the interviews that he has done, I don't think he understands, and that's the biggest problem, I think, with these tactics that we're seeing out of Washington, is they're targeting people who don't understand enough about the system to be able to defend themselves. And from what I could tell, he has not filed an appeal yet. So it's probably going to end up turning into one of those situations where it's somebody who just doesn't have the help or the resources to navigate through it. And unfortunately, if they wanted to do something with that lien, they could do something with it, force a sale of the property, take basically this guy's entire multi-generational legacy away from him for watering some hay fields for 20 days. And this is in Spokane County, Washington. So,
wow.
It's a pretty sad story if you think about it. But all of these other farmers, and we're seeing this, the state of Washington, they passed a bill to try and help the rest of the farmers out in Whatcom County with their water injunctions. But even then, they passed a bill that would help with funding to help them navigate the process, and then the funding is short, so you still have a lot of people who are unfortunately going to fall through the crosshairs. And if they can't prove that they have rights to water, not only are they not going to be able to farm, but that farmland is essentially worthless. And the people who end up benefiting are the large corporations who have the attorneys and the ability to navigate the bureaucratic system.
Yeah, of course, they'll come in and scoop up all this stuff for pennies on the dollar once everybody else is broke and can't afford to fight anymore, huh? So you say there's 30,000 of these folks being targeted. What's the government saying here? Like, is there some endangered fish? Like, I read your story, but like, why is the government now so interested in this water in this basin here?
You know, they all have different reasons for it. In the state of Washington, you've had to have a permit for watering going back to the early 1900s. They were kind of loose on the way they tracked that up until recent years, and then they kind of put it on everybody else to prove that they have the water rights. But basically, they've over-allocated the amount of water that supposedly they have available to be able to allocate to other uses. So instead of trying to navigate, different ways of doing it, they've just basically gone out, and the first thing they're trying to do is cut off everybody who doesn't know how to navigate through the system by saying, prove it to us. But other than that, I don't think Washington necessarily has a huge water problem, not like you see in some of the other western states.
Yeah. I've got a very good friend. In fact, we've had her on the program before, Debbie Bacigalupi. She comes with us to a lot of these UN climate conferences, and she's got a very large family cattle ranch in Northern California. And the water problem is actually entirely caused by government. They're blowing up all the dams and just making sure that life cannot continue there. Charlie, I know you do your own agriculture and you follow these issues very closely. What are you seeing in the other western states, in Oregon and California? I think the last time you and I talked, we were talking about some new efforts in Oregon that were going to result in bankrupting large numbers of small farmers, right? Regular people just trying to eke out a living and grow a little bit of food. What are you seeing? Is this a broader trend? Is this taking place outside of Washington as well?
Oh, yeah. I mean, in Oregon, last time we talked, they were trying to redefine what a CAFO was.
That's
to
right.
Basically any type of confined animal feeding operation. And they actually kind of backed off that due to public pressure. But one of the things that they continued to move forward with was stopping market gardeners from being able to water their gardens and sell their produce. And there are a lot of market gardeners who got shut down in that process because, in Oregon, you can water up to, I think it's 5,000 gallons a day or something like that for commercial purposes, but not to irrigate. And I think the intent of the law was to keep businesses from watering gardens and making their grounds look really pretty, not necessarily to stop a farmer from growing a crop and taking it to the market. But they interpreted the law that way, and they shut down a lot of their small market gardeners. And it doesn't sound like something that you'd see out of the state of Oregon, because they tend to lean more towards that organic, small farm friendly feel. But they actually did that, and again, it benefited the larger corporations. And then this year, Oregon went after the small farmers again. Again, they backed off due to public pressure, but this is still something that they're trying to figure out how to move forward with, and that is they wanted to change their farm stand policies to cut back on a lot of the ways that farmers earn an income off of their land. And this is something, if you ever watch the Jeremy Clarkson farm show, he battles this out constantly over in Europe. But basically, for a farmer who has a farm stand, or they're trying to earn income off of their farm, they have things like hats, t-shirts. They host small events, things like that. And the state of Oregon was pretty much trying to wipe out anything other than just the organic raw materials coming off of that farm. So these farmers had no other sources to help people who just want to support their farm support them. But California, you mentioned, California is even worse, especially with what they're doing with the dam removals. When they removed the Klamath dams, they actually killed hundreds of thousands of fish. And they say it's about the fish, but
Hundreds
it
of
has
guys
nothing
saving
to do
fish,
with
right?
fish. Yeah,
exactly.
If you look at Potter Valley, this is one that blows my mind. They cut off water over the summertime to, all the farmers in Potter Valley, anybody who depends on the Russian River for irrigation. And their reasoning was because they had to have more water going down the Eel River in order to maintain the fish population, keep them healthy. If you actually look at what the dam is supposed to supply the Eel River, it's about 4 to 6 times what actually comes out of the Eel River headwaters during the summer months. So the dam in and of itself is sustaining the fish population downstream from the Eel River. You remove that and they're not even going to get the water flows that they cut off farmers and ranchers in order to get over the summertime. So it's all an optics thing. It has nothing to do with fish. They remove the dam, the fish aren't going to survive. And then on top of that, they've removed a bunch of farmers off of Point Reyes because of the Tule elk, and yet they're going to have to depopulate the Tule elk, which there's over, I think, 1,000 head in the Potter Valley area. They're going to have to depopulate it. Some people have said as much as 90%. I don't know where that number comes from, but I do know that Fish and Wildlife has actually increased hunting licenses and tags this year in anticipation that they're going to be taking down the Scott Dam. And so you have these kind of optics of we're doing this for the environment, we're doing this for the animals, but yet it's killing hundreds of thousands of fish. It's causing them to depopulate elk populations, and the Tule elk is unique to California. There's probably 5,000 or 6,000 of them. There's 5,000 wolves in the lower southern states. They're federally protected, but the Tule elk is just protected in the state of California, and their governor is willing to wipe out large swaths of their populations just to take down these dams.
And I know people who are personally affected by these particular dam removals. I've been there. I've interviewed the folks there. Like I mentioned, a good personal friend of mine. I've spent time at her ranch with my family. We've seen the heartbreak. And for the folks out there listening, it's like, oh, wow, agriculture policy. No, these are real people whose lives are being turned upside down. And if you know anything about farming and ranching, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. It's hard to do all of that in addition to fighting legal battles with the government. And some of the people I know out there, they've just been terrorized now by the state. They're flying drones over their property and, arguing with them about ponds and retention things. And just really, really horrible how they're treating these farmers.
Well, and in California, the other thing about this, when you talk about South Africa, the governor has this committee that's pulled together. It's like the Ag Equity Committee, and their plan is basically to use grant funds from the state of California to buy back land from farmers. And you're probably wondering who would sell their farm, but if you take down a dam, you take away all of their water, their land kind of becomes worthless, so it becomes super cheap for the government to buy back. But they can't continue to manage that property anymore and a lot of these people, like the Potter Valley Scott Dam, that's been there for 100 years. So a lot of them had no idea that this was even a possibility. But then they want to buy back this land and basically grant it back out to diversify to minorities. But a lot of that's also going to remain in state hands and go into renewable energy projects. And if you look at California right now, they've got one nuclear site that I think is costing the taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars to keep operating at this point in time. But their solar projects haven't done very well either. They spent $2.2 billion on a solar farm out in the desert that is shutting down next year. So it's sad, but they're actually a lot of these projects that seem to be shutting down farmers and ranchers are coupled with this plan to basically buy back a bunch of land and redistribute it. It's crazy
because I've seen these parallels now. It happened in Zimbabwe first. It used to be known as the breadbasket of Africa. The Marxist government put in place, by the way, with a lot of help from Jimmy Carter and Henry Kissinger and the rest of the clown car. Henry Kissinger, infamous for National Security Memo 200. We're going to use food as a weapon to depopulate the third world. They came in and they seized massive amounts of the most productive farms in the world. and redistribute it to their cronies who had no idea how to farm, who had no interest in farming, and they needed food aid. Surprise! Now we have to send them food aid to prevent them from starving. We're watching the same thing happen in South Africa. Massive agitation about, the farmers have the wrong skin color or whatever. The government owns way more land than these supposedly evil, terrible farmers, and yet somehow we still have to expropriate their land. Now they're doing it without compensation. They're not even pretending like there's any legitimacy here. And of course, we're going to see that in the United States if we're not careful. It's the direction we're moving. Charlie, I want to turn now to the international kind of big picture.
Sure.
The World Economic Forum has been obsessed with our food systems for some time. They've developed these food innovation hubs in the Netherlands and other places where, again, they're kicking off huge numbers of farmers, expropriating land, bankrupting families who've been farming this land for centuries. We're seeing the Rockefellers with their agriculture, food system transformation programs. What are these people up to, and what does that mean, not just for the people who produce our food, which we're very grateful for them, but for those of us who also like to eat?
Well, I think it comes down to a lot of different things, actually, because if you look at the tech boom right now, the biggest problem that they're going to run into is private land ownership. You're seeing it. I'm going to revert back to the U.S. here for a second, but this is going on across the world. You hear about these same stories happening in Europe where they're putting in these high voltage transmission line corridors in order to feed data centers and this big tech revolution that we're going through. In Maryland, you've got a case right now where farmers are going to the Supreme Court because they've got people coming out and surveying their properties before they even had eminent domain. It's almost like these things are planned, but the farmers are in the way of all that, and the resources are too thin for all of that because this growth requires a lot of water. Farmers require water, so it's just kind of eliminating them to get them out of the way. But then on the other side of that, you have these patented food products coming out, and the more, when you look at the Netherlands, they're becoming a hub for some of these lab-grown foods, alternative foods that most of us would not want to eat, but they're developing in there. And it's completely replacing agriculture. But with that, you can pretty much do anything you want to the population, because now you control what's going into their bodies. Now you control their income even more, because you're talking about trillions of dollars that are spent every year just on agriculture. Imagine that going into patented food products, and imagine trying to get vaccines out to the general public that don't want them. It's in their food. You can do pretty much anything you want to.
And they've talked about this openly, Charlie. That's not like speculation. They've talked about vaccinating us through our lettuce, and they're not playing with this stuff. No. Yeah, that's really troubling. And of course, the desire for intellectual property is really significant there. They want to own the genetic code of the plants that we eat and the animals that we eat, and they've made that very clear.
At this point, they've actually changed, the microbials of the soil. If you get into some of the projects Gates is working on, if people talk about GMOs, but it's so widespread in our ecosystem at this point in time, and it's all patented, so we don't own it anymore.
Yeah. So what does this mean for us? And I do want to save time at the end to make sure we have an opportunity to share with the folks some of the things that we can do as consumers, as maybe small-time food producers, even if it's just like a little backyard garden or whatever. But what does this mean for us? Food prices are going to keep going up. We're going to have less choice. Where does this lead for those of us who like to eat?
Well, I think it takes away our choice of food. I did a video on this the other day. I was talking about, there's one state in the United States that actually has in their state constitution the right to grow food. Nobody else actually has that right. That's the state of Maine, believe it or not. Wow. And that's being challenged in court right now because the city doesn't want some people to have some chickens. But we think that we have these inalienable rights, that we have the right to grow food, to eat, whatever we want to. But there are people out there who would like to argue that we actually don't have that right. And you see it every day in the United States. If you live in an HOA or you live in a city and the city comes out and says you can't have chickens or you can't grow a garden in your front yard, those rights are constantly being slowly taken away from us. But the truth is if we give up our food sovereignty, we give up the ultimate liberty, and basically complete control over our own bodies, because now we're giving that to the hands of corporations or to the hands of people who want to feed us all sorts of weird chemicals in our food for vaccination purposes. And it's really the complete loss of any liberty we have if we can't even choose what goes in our body.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really troubling, folks. And I know for most people this isn't even on their radar, because they don't produce food. They just go to the grocery store and food comes from the shelf. I mean, where else would it come from? But this is going to affect all of us. If you read the 2030 agenda. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it wasn't even on, in my thought until we moved out, lived on a farm, and we started connecting ourselves with our community. And then the broader we've gotten with our documentaries, traveling across the United States and Canada. Canada is a mess, by the way, when it comes to water rights. But the more we've learned, and the more eye-opening it is. And then when you hear about the stuff that's happening in Europe and all around the world, South Africa, it becomes very real. And when that reality sets in, and you realize what it actually means to lose that right to food freedom, it's a scary future.
Yeah, it really is, folks. And even if you don't like to eat, your kids probably do, right? So Henry Kissinger understood very well as National Security Advisor the power that food gave those who control it. And he go read National Security Memorandum 200. He openly talks about how the United States should use food as a weapon in its foreign policy arsenal to convince third world governments that they need to depopulate, that they need to restrict the growth of their populations. It's cold, it's calculated, it's frankly disgusting that this was done in our name and with our tax money. But these people really do see food as a weapon to control us and to get us to do what they want. Charlie, we're almost out of time today. It just flew past, but I want to leave people with some hope and some good ideas on what they can do. What are your recommendations for Americans who maybe haven't thought too much about food sovereignty, food freedom, property rights, the right to grow our own food? Where do we start? How do we get involved?
Well, I think you start by starting to buy direct from a farmer, because a lot of the farmers in our country, we hear about farmer bankruptcies, some of the challenges they're facing right now. A lot of that is just the way the system is working against them. If you start buying direct from a farmer, you start building a relationship with your local farmer, that is going to remove that middleman, and it's going to protect at least your local food system. It's going to make them stronger. You're going to get healthier food that's not ultra processed. And then, also learning to grow some of the food on your own, even if it's in some pots in your apartment. Anything that you can do to reconnect yourself with something that we've been completely separated from is going to help. It's going to help the entire movement of protecting food freedom. The more people educate themselves on it, the better chance we have at maintaining it.
I couldn't agree with you more. And just educating yourself is a good first step, folks. We did a big issue in the New American about the war on farmers. We showed you how this was happening around the world. Different pretexts, but ultimately the same objective: kick the small producers, the medium-sized producers off the land, bring in the big mega corporate government-connected farms, and take total control, all of it genetically engineered so that you don't get to produce your own food. Another place you can get educated on some of this stuff is yanasad.tv, which is where Charlie publishes his information. If you just go through here, he's got all kinds of great information about what's happening across the country. Charlie, what about public policy? Do you have any thoughts on how people might get involved with their local or their state or even their federal policymakers to try to make sure that these rights are protected, if not for themselves, at least for the farmers in their communities and their states?
With public policy, one of the first things you should do is educate yourself on how it's going to have an impact, because there are a lot of things that sound good until you start looking into them, and then you realize that they're actually very damaging to farmers. And I'm not just talking, big farmers, but small farmers. And then getting involved once you've kind of gained some of that knowledge, and contacting your congressman if you hear something that you disagree with or you think would be hurtful to you. The raw milk situation that keeps popping up. It sounds like a trendy thing, but there's actually a lot more to that than I think meets the eye. They've been using it as an excuse to go after basically private associations, private membership associations, and herd shares, which are, again, private ownerships. The fact that they're willing to go so far as taking away somebody's right to have milk that comes from a cow that they own shares of is crazy. But they're actually trying to do that right now in North Carolina. So getting involved with policies, understanding how they impact not just, what you're hearing about on TV, but how it might have an impact all the way down the line as far as some of these private membership associations, and speaking up against it. I mean, the government should not be getting involved in private contracts between individuals and farm animals and where their food comes from. That's ridiculous. And any policies that would open up the public's choice to choose where their food comes from. Right now, believe it or not, you can't go to your neighbor and buy a couple pork chops that they had processed from their pig because of all of the ridiculous laws, even though it came from an inspected facility.
Land of the free, huh? You can't buy pork chops from your neighbor. Now, this is really serious, folks, and we know where they're going with this. I mean, you go back to the early 1970s when the UN met for the Habitat 1 summit. They put out the Vancouver Declaration, and they said right in there in plain English, land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset. It contributes to social injustice. It needs to be under public control. They're coming for your property rights. They're coming for your ability to feed yourself and produce the things that you need to be able to live. And it's very, very dangerous. Charlie, what are the best places to follow your work? I know you have or had a very large YouTube channel. I don't know if the totalitarians have banned you yet, but how do people follow your work?
Yeah, we still have Yanasa TV, which is our YouTube channel, yanasa.tv, which is our Substack. We post basically a lot of background information on most of the videos that I put up, and anything that I don't have time to do a video on, I at least put a write-up on that website, so that's a great source. We also do work on some documentaries, so if you're interested in that and a little less interested in the politics of it all, you can go to look up Meet My Neighbor Productions, which is a nonprofit which we've put together to help educate people about where their food comes from. And we also, through our nonprofit, do a lot of work with rural youth, because we're losing a lot of rural youth in areas, and that's going to impact our food supply as well if people don't want to stay out there growing it.
Yeah. I've heard a bunch of times the average age of a farmer is like 60-something in the United States. It's just crazy how the young people are.
Yeah. And the crazy thing about that is that over the next 10 years, you're going to see one of the largest land exchanges ever, because there's so many people that are just going to be selling off their grandparents' farm when it's time. And if you don't think that there's going to be, a war over control of where that land goes, you're missing the boat.
Yeah, folks, these issues are really, really important. That's why we spent today talking about them. Charlie, I want to thank you for what you're doing. Thank you very much for coming on the program today. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. We'll definitely get you back to discuss these issues as they evolve, but thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And you, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you will get involved somehow, some way. In addition to following Charlie's work, please get over to thenewamerican.com, thenewamerican.com. Sign up for the printed magazine, whether you're watching us on TV or listening to us on radio. You got to get involved. Thenewamerican.com is a really great place to start. I'm Alex Newman. This is Behind the Deep State for The New American. Really appreciate you tuning in. It's not enough to know stuff. You got to do stuff. Thanks again. Until next time, we appreciate you, and God bless you all.